The wind howled like a grieving spirit, tugging at the widow's tattered shawl as she stood on the cliff's edge, her newborn cradled tightly against her chest. Below, the jagged rocks met the churning sea in a violent embrace, whispering promises of an end to her pain. Her tears fell silently, mixing with the salt spray, as the baby's soft whimpers pierced her heart. She was alone, utterly, achingly alone, or so she thought. Then, from the shadows of the dusk, a voice, rough but warm, broke through, "You're not alone." Her name was Clara, and just 3 weeks ago, her world had been whole. She and her husband, Elias, had lived in a modest cabin nestled in the rolling hills of Montana, their days filled with the quiet rhythm of love and labor. Elias was a carpenter, his hands calloused but gentle, always carving little trinkets for the baby they were expecting. Clara, with her quick laugh and fierce spirit, tended their small garden and dreamed of the family they'd raise. They weren't rich, but they had each other, and that was enough. When Clara went into labor, Elias had held her hand, his eyes shining with pride as their daughter, Lily, came into the world. But the joy was fleeting. A fever swept through Elias like wildfire, stealing his strength, his breath, his life, in just 2 days. Clara buried him beneath the oak tree behind their cabin, her screams swallowed by the endless sky now. With Lily's tiny weight in her arms, Clara felt the world pressing down on her. The cabin was too empty, the silence too loud. Their savings were gone, spent on medicine that hadn't saved Elias. The nearest town was a day's walk, and the neighbors, scattered across the vast plains, were strangers to her grief. She tried to keep going, feeding Lily, tending the fire, but every task felt like wading through molasses. The night before, she'd sat by the hearth, staring at the flames, and the thought had crept in, what if I just stopped? It wasn't a plan, not really, but it led her here, to the cliff, where the wind seemed to beckon her forward. She didn't hear the rancher approach. His name was Amos, a man weathered by 50 years of sun and solitude, his face etched with lines that told of losses he seldom spoke of. He'd been driving his cattle through the hills when he saw her silhouette against the fading light, a figure so still it chilled him. Amos had no wife, no children. His own love story had ended decades ago, when smallpox claimed the woman he'd planned to marry. Since then, he'd poured his heart into his land, his herd, convincing himself it was enough. But seeing Clara, something stirred in him, a memory of despair he'd once known too well. "You're not alone," he said again, softer this time, stepping closer but keeping his distance, like approaching a startled deer. Clara flinched, her eyes wild with fear and shame. "Go away," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand." Amos didn't move. Instead, he sat on a nearby rock, his hands resting on his knees, and said, "Maybe I don't. But I know what it's like to feel like the world's done with you. And I know you got that little one there who ain't done with you yet." Clara's arms tightened around Lily, who stirred, her tiny fist brushing Clara's cheek. The touch was a jolt, pulling her back from the edge, if only for a moment. "I can't do this," she said, tears streaming. "He's gone, and I don't know how to live without him." Amos nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Lost my Sarah a long time ago," he said quietly. "Thought I'd never climb out of that hole. But I did, one day at a time. Don't mean it stops huntin', but it means you can carry it." They sat there as the sky darkened, Clara still on the cliff's edge, Amos a steady presence beside her. He didn't push, didn't preach, just shared his story, his voice a low rumble against the wind. He spoke of Sarah's laugh, of the ranch he'd built to honor her, of the nights he'd raged at God but kept going anyway. Clara listened, her sobs quieting, and for the first time in weeks, she felt seen. Not as a widow, not as a failure, but as a person still breathing, still fighting. Finally, she stepped back from the edge, her legs trembling. Amos stood, offering his hand, and she took it, her grip weak but real. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "Then we'll figure it out," Amos said simply. He led her to his horse, helped her mount with Lily still in her arms, and walked them to his ranch, a sprawling place with a warm kitchen and a fire already crackling. There, over a meal of stew and bread, Clara told her story, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. Amos listened, nodding, offering no solutions, just understanding. The days that followed were hard. Clara stayed at the ranch, sleeping in a guest room with Lily's cradle beside her. Grief still clawed at her, waking her with nightmares of Elias's fevered face. She struggled to eat, to smile, to believe she could be a mother without him. But Amos was there, patient and practical. He showed her how to milk the cows, gave her small tasks to keep her hands busy, and sat with her in the evenings, sharing stories of the land. His ranch hands, a gruff but kind bunch, welcomed her too, slipping Lily little carved toys and calling her the boss. The biggest challenge came when Clara realized she couldn't stay forever. Amos's ranch was a haven, but her life, her cabin, her garden, her memories of Elias, was elsewhere. The thought of returning terrified her. "What if I fall apart again?" she asked Amos one night, Lily asleep in her lap. He looked at her, his eyes steady. "You might. But you've got folks now. Me, the boys, this little girl. You don't have to carry it all alone." Clara decided to go back, but not alone. Amos and two of his hands helped her repair the cabin, which had fallen into disrepair. They fixed the roof, restocked the pantry, and planted new seeds in the garden. The neighbors, hearing of her loss, began to visit, bringing food, blankets, stories of their own. Clara found herself woven into a community she hadn't known existed, each connection a thread pulling her back to life. One evening, months later, Clara stood outside her cabin, Lily giggling in her arms as the sun set over the hills. The pain of Elias's absence hadn't vanished, it never would, but it had softened, making room for new joys, Lily's first smile, the scent of fresh bread, the sound of Amos's laughter when he visited. She thought of that night on the cliff, how close she'd come to losing everything, and whispered a quiet thank you to Elias, to Amos, to herself for choosing to stay. As the stars emerged, Clara heard hoofbeats. Amos rode up, dismounting with a grin. "Thought I'd check on my favorite neighbors," he said, ruffling Lily's hair. Clara smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in a year. "You're just in time for supper," she said. They walked inside together, the cabin glowing with warmth, a testament to survival, to love that endured, to the truth that even in the darkest moments, no one is truly alone. And there, dear viewer, is where we leave Clara, Lily, and Amos, not at the end, but at a new beginning. Their story reminds us that grief can feel like a cliff's edge, but there's always someone, somewhere, ready to say, you're not alone. So, reach out, hold on, and keep going. You're stronger than you know, and your story isn't over yet.